What's up guys, Riley here, and today I'm going to be changing up the pace a little bit. Obviously the last few videos I've done have been Excel related, but today I'm going to be, like I said, mixing it up a bit. I'm talking about music, and there's a site called tier list, or actually tiermaker.com, where you can make tier lists, and they're already custom made and all that stuff. You can make your own as well, but there's tons of different stuff like movies and sports and food and all that stuff. Basically whatever you can think of, you can probably find on this site to tier list. So I'm going to be going through some music albums, and the list is called Rate Your Music Core Tier List Maker, so it's going to be based on albums that are, I wouldn't say always highly rated, but I'd say often talked about on Rate Your Music, which is a music rating site which I sort of casually partake in, maybe not investing as much time as some other people on there, which it's really impressive, seeing the amount of depth that some people go into to their reviews and all that. But I do like to rate my albums that I listen to, especially the newer ones that come out. Just kind of keep track of what I'm listening to and all that. So I'm going to be going through this list today. First off, I really wanted to say thanks for all the support recently on all the Excel videos. Some really great feedback, some great comments and suggestions as well. So I really appreciate all that. Definitely will be making more Excel videos in the future. However, I do want to also explore some of my other interests, and I think for me, music is a pretty big fixation in my life. So let's just get right into it here today. I do have these already eliminated. Actually, let me go over the tier quick. So I've sort of skewed the tiers because a lot of these albums are just it's a really good selection of albums. A lot of these are going to be really good. So rather than separating good from bad, I'm more separating great from good. So as you can see here, I've sort of skewed it where you have masterpiece, excellent, good, interesting at times, and then below average simply symbolizes like a below average album maybe for this list, and then poor, those are probably the few, if there is any in this one. I kind of highly doubt there will be any poorly rated albums in this selection, but if I do come across any albums that I do think stand out from the rest as being a lot worse. But most of this is going to be focused on, like I said, separating the great albums from the good ones. And starting off here, I think it starts off pretty fittingly. We have a Rage Against the Machine. I believe this is just the self-titled, and it's a great cover overall. Artwork on this thing matches the music perfectly. I think for the times right now, Rage Against the Machine fits pretty well. Zach De La Rocha, great vocals on this thing throughout. Really interesting lyrics, obviously very politically tied, which I think it's funny because I've been seeing some people lately just figuring out that Rage Against the Machine is politically influenced, which I think is kind of funny. But yeah, definitely a band that is hugely tied to their political views, and so you may not agree with them, but at the same time, it's hard to deny that they make some solid music, some of the most iconic punk riffs in history, honestly. So for me, this one is going to fit in the excellent tier, and I think we're probably going to be seeing a lot of these throughout this list. But I mean, for me, excellent is one that's not quite a masterpiece, perfect through and through. However, it's still a very essential album to listen to. Lots of quality tracks, but maybe some maybe some misses here and there. And I think that's kind of where, for me, this lies. I think Killing in the Name is probably my standout track from this, one of my favorites to listen to. Actually, I've seen a few covers of it recently as well. Actually, Denzel Curry has done within the past, I think it would have been like 1 or 2 years ago, he did a cover of Bulls on Parade, not following on this project, but a great Rage Against the Machine song. So it's definitely I feel like an album that has influenced actually a lot of rap and hip hop these days. You can disagree with me if you want, but just kind of how I see things there, with some of the aggressively delivered lyrics and all that. Obviously, it is still pretty rap influence itself. But moving on, we have a Kanye West album here, College Dropout. And I actually don't really see too many other Kanye Wests. To be fair, I think I've already, just right after I said that, I just saw 2 more. So we'll be talking about Kanye West a few more times throughout this thing. College Dropout for me actually is, I don't know, it's sort of worn off. The luster of it has worn off a little bit for me. I think early on when I first got into Kanye West, College Dropout, and for me personally, this came out before I had really gotten into music a lot. So this would have been, I think, like 2008 maybe, 2006. How far back is this? I can't even remember, but it's been a while since this came out, and for me, I was pretty young at the time, so I didn't really listen to it right as it came out, and that for me might influence my decision here. But I'm going to stick it in good. I think it's a quality album all the way through, some really influential stuff. but at the same time, I wouldn't necessarily go out of my way to recommend listening to The College Dropout to anyone. Definitely some pretty iconic songs like Through the Wire and Jesus Walks, for example, are two notables that I really liked. But honestly, for me, this is Kanye, at one of the more early stages when it comes to his personal songwriting and also producing stage. Obviously, he's been a producer for a while at this point, so he definitely has grown as an artist. And I think right here, it's a really solid take, obviously for a first solo album, but at the same time, it's not one of my favorites of his, and that's kind of how I feel about it now. So it's still a really good album all the way through. If you're a huge Kanye fan, I mean, I would kind of worry for you if you hadn't listened to it, but if you're just getting into Kanye, probably one of the first ones I would listen to because it is at the start of his catalog. Moving on, we have To Pimp a Butterfly by Kendrick Lamar. I was a huge Kendrick Lamar fan throughout my high school years. Probably would have stuck this in Masterpiece, no doubt, if you would have asked me 3 years ago. But for me, this one falls excellent here. And I think it's got a great storyline interwoven through it. Some of the best, jazz-influenced hip-hop songs to probably ever be recorded. Some absolutely just mind-blowingly good lyrics in this thing. And great experimentation as well. So overall, I mean, pretty much anything you can ask for a hip-hop album might fall into that very, very upper echelon of hip-hop albums for me if you have to ask, for a favorite hip-hop album. But at this point in my life, I don't really listen to it all that much. It doesn't do too much for me, but honestly, at the times right now, too, it's kind of funny. You have those two excellent albums right now. You have Rage, and then you have Kendrick Lamar as well. Two albums that, honestly, if you haven't really gotten into them, and you're pretty interested in the whole happenings right now, in terms of what's going on in the world, I think these are both very, very necessary albums to listen to, and some great political commentary throughout both of them, which I really, really enjoy. And just for me right now, personally, not two that I listen to all that much. I'm also talking about the Rage one. Moving on, we have Black Sabbath's Paranoid, and this one features some of the greatest heavy metal riffs of all time. I mean, pretty much it's insane, going through track by track. Almost all of these tracks have iconic riffs on them. Iron Man being one of them, probably one of Black Sabbath's more famous tracks in general. But obviously, I think for me, the shortfallings of this thing are the lyrics, and I probably am still going to stick this thing in excellent, because it's just really hard for me to say this isn't up in as a necessary album, essentially, because you really need to listen to this if you're into heavy metal, as it is one of the first great heavy metal albums there was. But honestly, if you had to ask me, I almost prefer Black Sabbath's opener self-titled album. Back it would have been in, I think, 69 or 70. Not really too good with the associating years with albums, but it would have been around that time period, late 60s, early 70s. Where they are pretty much, that was essentially one of the first heavy metal albums ever released, but this one pretty much perfected Black Sabbath sound, and some really, really great tracks on this thing. But do I listen to it all that much? I'd say every so often. I definitely will give it a run through, but it's not one of my favorites. Then moving on, we have Arcade Fire's Funeral. Now this one's always sort of been a tough one for me because I really enjoy some of the tracks throughout this thing, and I think also another narrative-based album that has stories interwoven throughout it. But I don't know, I'd say it's more good than excellent. And I mean, if we're taking a look at all these albums compared to every single other album that ever exists, these are all going to fall in the top tier. But when we're taking a look at this list, I think for me, Arcade Fire doesn't quite do it as much as some of the other ones for me. And just a personal preference. I mean, I honestly might listen to Arcade Fire, this project, more than the three above it, and excellent right now. But for me, when it comes to its, I don't know, I feel like its influence, not quite there in terms of meeting the excellent tier quality when it comes to this list. Because obviously, this list for me is filled with quality albums, so it's going to be really, really tough for me to stick everything up there in excellent and masterpiece. Anyways, so moving down, we have American Football's LP1. Another tough one for me, where I'm not really sure where to stick it. I don't really listen to this one all that often, but obviously if you're a Midwest emo fan, or even like a math rock fan as well, it's pretty much an essential. American Football being probably one of the more prominent faces of Midwest emo, if not the most prominent. And I don't know, for me, I don't really listen to Midwest emo all that often. It's not really quite my sound that I enjoy. I think there's other types of genres that I listen to that probably fill in for this for me. And when it comes to American Football's selection of albums so far, their 3 LPs, honestly, the 2 following this one were, for me, represented pretty significant drop-offs. So I think it almost makes this one even that much more impressive, showing that it is a tough sound to replicate and continuously put out quality records, because it is such an intimate sort of album, and I feel like it's so much tied to personal experience more than anything. So for me, this one is probably gonna fall in the good tier, and it's not to discount it or anything like that, but for me, it's just not something that I go back to all that often. It just doesn't quite connect with me as some of these other ones that are coming up will and currently do. But it's definitely not to discount it, because honestly, for me, anything in this list above and Interesting at Times is a really quality album that I 100% recommend listening to. So it's so tough, because it's so tough with these. I mean, even like Rage here, it's almost a toss-up between good and excellent in this list, but I mean, it's not really all that worth arguing too much about the specifics when it's more important just to kind of appreciate the work itself. So moving on this list, I mean, I realize this is a long list, so I'm going to have to start flying through these things here. Merriweather Post Pavilion by Animal Collective. This is probably my 3rd or 4th favorite Animal Collective album. Honestly, in this list, for me, it doesn't fall all that high, and I think it just doesn't quite hit with me as much as like Feels does, as Strawberry Jam does. I'm going to get a little pop-up here. Okay. Anyways, so yeah, for me, I'm going to stick it Interesting at Times, and it's just simply because Animal Collective for me has surpassed this album, I'd say probably 2 to 3 other times. With Feels, you have Spirit That Gone, Spirit That Vanished, and then you have Strawberry Jam. Those are the 3 that I'd put above Merriweather Post Pavilion. So I'm going to stick this one at Interesting at Times. Honestly, if you're an Animal Collective fan, I feel like you might sort of agree with me a little bit more, but if you're like a casual Animal Collective fan, this one might be more of your favorite. So it really kind of, I feel like, depends on how interested you are in Animal Collective's sound, because some of the stuff that they were doing early on in their early years, even like Dancy Manatee, just some really unique sounds that you're not going to find anywhere else. Then we have the Low End Theory by A Tribe Called Quest. Was really heavy into this one in high school. Again, tell my friends like this one as well. I think it's going to be one that I also stick in Interesting at Times. Some of the best hip hop beats you're going to find, really sort of embodying that 90s hip hop boom bap sound, if you will. But just for me at this point in time, not really something that I listen to all that much. And I don't know, just maybe the like I said, maybe the luster has sort of faded for this one as well for me a little bit. But yeah, I'm not something musically does as much for me as some of these other ones that are coming up. Then we have a Big Black album coming up. It looks like we only have one Big Black, but when it comes to noise rock, really hard to find a better band than maybe like throw in Swans, but Big Black is definitely an essential listen. This one is going to go in good for me. It doesn't quite meet the excellent tier, and as you can see, I think for me, the excellent masterpiece tier are going to be a really exclusive group. I might even slide this Rage one back down to good as well, because I think for me, it's just I want to make this list a little bit more exclusive to the top 2, just considering how quality these albums are. But yeah, Big Black, a really solid album here. I'm not going to write out the title. I want to keep this video PG-13. But a really solid album. I 100% check out Big Black. Atomizer is another one that I would listen to for sure if you're into noise rock, and for me, noise rock is probably one of my favorite genres at this point in my life. Then we have Vespertines by Bjork, probably one of my favorite Bjork records, maybe my favorite. So this one's another one that instantly goes to good. Not quite meeting an excellent tier or anything like that, but still, when it comes to art pop, once again, throwing maybe Kate Bush, throwing a handful of others, but really tough to match the consistent quality of Bjork's output throughout her career, and Vespertines is probably one of her best. Then we have Ever Since by Blade. Now this one is like the first sort of curveball, and we have a few coming up I can see for me, but yeah, Ever Since. Blade, I'm a huge fan of, and it's definitely weird. It's definitely something I'm not really attuned to listening to. It's even more like, it's cloud rap, a little bit, even throwing like vaporwave. There's definitely bits of that, interwoven throughout Blade's work. But yeah, this one for me is actually going to fall. It's between interesting at times and below average, and this one really, I'd say interesting at times more than anything. I think it's probably an essential Blade listen. If you're a Blade fan, obviously Eversense is probably one of the first you go and listen to. And when I say below average, I mean below average for the selection. Obviously, like I said before, such a quality selection of albums that it's hard for me to stick this one any higher. But interesting at times, I think it's still definitely worth a listen. When it comes to cloud rap, and not too many better than Blade at what he does. Actually, Echo 2K, one of his label mates, has put out a great project within the last year called E, a very simple title, but very, very solid at what it does, and really encapsulates that cloud rap sound. Probably for me, I prefer that one to Eversense, but still a really unique sound nonetheless, and probably worth a listen. But it does feel a bit weird to stick this on the same tier as the low end theory. So I'm actually I'm going to go ahead and stick it below average for this list. I'm sorry, Blade, but below average for you. When it comes to comparing a Tribe Called Quest and Blade, I feel a little bad, even though Blade has such a unique sound himself. Anyways, moving down, we have Blank Banshee, and from this one really just does not hit with me at all. I might just stick this one as poor just to have one poor, just to balance out the list a little bit here. But for me, when it comes to comparing this album to every single other one here, really, really does not connect with me at all. I don't really feel any emotion towards this one. I don't listen to it very often at all. I have listened to it a handful of times. But yeah, when I'm comparing, how can you compare Blank Banshee to like the College Dropout or something like that? Obviously, vastly different albums. But when it comes to just like the quality, and I feel like the talent that goes into making these things, I mean, it's just, I don't know, for me it just doesn't really compare. And I'd say I definitely prefer Eversense to Blank Banshee, so I wouldn't really want to put those on the same tier. So we'll stick it in poor compared to the rest of these albums in the selection. But obviously, if we were to compare it to every single album in existence, it's still an interesting album for sure. That's probably worth a listen or two. Moving down the list, we have Blonde by Frank Ocean. Definitely grew on me a lot. There's some great singles, probably some of my favorites, or I say singles, more just tracks. I don't think he really released too many of these as singles at all. Actually, now that I think about it, I don't even know if he did release singles leading up to the output of Blonde. But actually, when talking about tracks, White Ferrari, Ivy, two of my favorites. Nights, obviously, probably a fan favorite of his. But actually, I prefer Endless, which is like the sister album to this one, released within a week of each other. That isn't on streaming right now, and I've listened to it a handful of times, and it's just incredible how good Endless is. I mean, not to discount Blonde, but when they're released, together, essentially, I sort of have to compare them. And Blonde, as good as it is, I'm going to stick it in good. I still think there's some amazing tracks on this thing. There's a cohesive narrative as well, which is always pleasant, I think, for me. I like to follow a story, almost like I'm reading a book or watching a movie with my music. So definitely some very redeeming qualities of Blonde. But if I was to compare Blonde to Endless, if Endless was on this list, Endless would be, for me, an easy excellent. Which is impressive considering the three that are in excellent right now. So definitely a solid album though. Blonde, if you're a Frank Ocean fan, I'm sure you've listened to Blonde at this point, but if you're not and you're into R&B or sort of like the neo, even like soul bits a little bit, ambient pop, stuff like that, there's definitely bits of even like, I'd say it's more art pop than anything else. If we're talking genre specifics, but yeah, for me, Blonde goes in the good tier. So moving down to Pink by Boris. Now this is going to be more of a stoner rock, even shoegazy project by, I think they're Japanese, Boris's. So Boris for me has released some really interesting stuff, but Pink is really not one of my favorites of theirs. It's going to be stuck and interesting at times, and there's definitely bits of this album that I like, but when it comes to just straight listening through it, it's not really one of my favorites of theirs, honestly. And I know it's pretty high rated, I think, on Rate Your Music, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, for me, Boris Pink isn't really all that notable, and I can already start to think of a few albums off the top of my head of their, from their catalog of albums that I prefer to this one straight through. So for me, I think Heavy Rocks is one if I'm remembering correctly. But yeah, for me, Boris, or Pink by Boris, not one of my favorites. Then moving down, we have some Burial here. And this one really grew on me. I know it's sort of I feel like it's almost like a cult classic you can consider, but it's got that UK garage sort of sound. Actually, if you listen to the new 1975 album, Notes on a Conditional Form, a lot of the ambient tracks in that sort of remind me of I guess lesser versions of the tracks on this, and I would 100% listen to it if you're into any sort of garage or like dubsteppy sort of sounds. And when I say dubstep, I feel like it's easy to tie Skrillex down to that dubstep label, but it's definitely different. It's not like club music or anything like that. It's definitely a little more down tempo. Also really interesting samples. Perfect album to go on a walk to, like a night walk. Throw on some Burial. Can't really get better than that. It's going to be thrown into the good tier for me. I did stick in Interesting at Times for a second there, but it is going to be stuck in the good tier. A solid album all the way through, no weak tracks. I mean, if you like the sound, you're going to like it. If you don't like the sound, you're probably not going to like it very much, because it is a pretty consistent idea base of sounds throughout the entire thing. Moving down, we have Jane Doe by Converge, and this one is going straight into the excellent tier for me. When I first heard this thing, I was absolutely blown away, and honestly, I kind of attribute this album as part of the reason why I don't really like classic 80s 90s heavy metal as much, like sort of thrash metal. It just doesn't really do anything for me when I can listen to Jane Doe, for example. Just the vocals are just absolutely amazing. If you're into metal, Jane Doe, 100% a must listen to album. Absolutely incredible. I think there is some parts of it that are, that they sort of hold it back from just a pure masterpiece, which I will be getting into. There is a metal album on this list that will be thrown into the masterpiece tier, but this one, yeah, it's really hard to get better than this, and definitely an excellent metal album. Moving down, we have Daft Punk. This one is thrown straight into Interesting at Times. Once again, it's sort of Interesting at Times. Sort of describes it best for me. Don't really listen to it all that often. When I do, I'm gonna have to sort of be in the mood for it. But I don't know. It just doesn't really get me. Or I don't really get Daft Punk as much as I do some of these other artists. It just doesn't really do it for me. That's kind of all I really have to say about that one. Nothing too notable there. And we have Dial It by Playboi Carti. This one grew on me a lot. Wasn't the biggest fan right away, but I think this one's still going to fit the Interesting at Times tier when it comes to this list. Obviously, still a really solid album itself, but being compared to other hip hop albums, like, it's not going to touch anything that Kendrick Lamar has done so far. However, when it comes to that cloud rap genre, definitely would prefer this one to Ever Since by Blade. But overall, I think it's a pretty solid project, and you really got to commend the sound that Playboi Carti has gone for. His innovative vocals at times, his simple but punchy delivery, or even more melodic deliveries as well, with his cute little his baby voice thing that he does. That definitely grew on me a lot as I continue to listen to it. So I think this is 154 by The Wire, if I'm not mistaken. A little bit of a more abstract album cover. This one's going to be This is going to be going in good. Actually, two albums by The Wire made this list here, actually, and my favorite one isn't on it as well. So I'm kind of disappointed that I didn't get to talk about Pink Flag a little bit, but still a really solid punk album. And when it comes to more intelligent punk, this is probably one of my favorites. It's just like, I saw a great review on this on Write Your Music. I think it was something along the lines of it's like getting basically an intellectual slap in the face or punch in the face. You're basically just going to be blown away by some of the deliveries here, some great guitar riffs, really interesting stuff by The Wire. So definitely listen to them if you're into any punk. I'm sure you have if you are a punk fan. Moving down, though, we have Donuts by J Dilla. This one always really intrigued me because I kind of get I don't know. Sometimes I'll get really intrigued by artists who have released an album maybe on their deathbed or just before they died, or there's some mysterious circumstances surrounding the artist's death, or stuff like that. Obviously, nothing mysterious about J Dilla's death, but just an album for me that sort of hits home a lot more, just due to the fact like just due to the context of how this album was being made. A lot of it, I'm pretty sure, was made in a hospital bed, or he's essentially getting weaker and weaker as he made this thing. And I think some of the samples on this thing are just absolutely outstanding. I do want to stick it in good. I was a little hesitant there. I kind of consider sticking it in interesting at times, but I don't know. There's just so many great cuts off this thing. It flows all the way through very nicely. And for me, J Dilla, I mean, an outstanding producer. Nothing, honestly, it's really hard to find another producer like him, if at all. So moving on here, we do have another The Wire album, and it's going to go straight. I'm not really going to talk about The Wire too much more. Stuck straight into good, but these two are actually not my favorite. Neither of them are my favorite The Wire album. You'd have to go find Pink Flag for that one. I don't believe this made the list, so not going to be talking about that one, but great punk group overall, like I said. Moving on, we have DJ Shadow introducing. This one, a lot of people like this one, but I really don't like this one all that much. It's not one of my favorites. It's got some good ambient cuts from it, but it is, I think this one is going to go in interesting at times. I think it's probably the best way to describe it and categorize it in this list. Once again, I mean, like I said, some great ambient cuts through it. DJ Shadow, really solid producer, and it falls along the lines of the plunderphonics genre. It's sort of hard to pronounce, but along with J Dilla, I think J Dilla is my favorite project, and I think a lot of people talk about, refer to, you have DJ Shadow, you have J Dilla, and you have the Avalanches as like the three sort of Mount Rushmore plunderphonics artists, and J Dilla Donuts is my favorite album of the bunch, and I believe the Avalanches made it as well, so I'll be talking about them a little bit later. But moving on, we have perhaps one of my favorite albums of all time, which is Philosophy by Burzum, and this one goes straight into the masterpiece tier. And I mean, this is, for me, the first time I listened to it actually would have been within the past year. I do have the LP on vinyl now. It just blew me away right away. The vocals are like nothing you've ever heard in your life, and the just the dark, melodic at times, instrumentals on this thing, but also heavy hitting guitar riffs just to blow your mind, especially if you're into black metal, like that Norwegian black metal, the atmospheric black metal. I mean, it's just like nothing you've ever heard before. And for me, who hadn't really been exposed to it until pretty late in life, I'd say, and I say late in life, I listened to it within the past year, which meant I would have been, 18 essentially. So not too late in life, but still, for me, when it comes to, really getting to music, it had been a few years anyways before I really got into Burzum, and Burzum just blew me away. Philosophy, it is easily my favorite album of his. In general, and talk about the man all you like, Varg, but he has done some horrible things, but when it comes to his music, if we're just going to consider the music, the product that he put out, just absolutely incredible. But I completely understand you objecting to listening to him based on his character and some of the things that he has done. Moving on, we have our first Radiohead album. I anticipate this isn't going to be the only one, but as Rate Your Music is very high on Radiohead, and I gotta say, I pretty much agree with that. I'm gonna stick this one in excellent in Rainbows. I think for me, one of the better summer albums that I associate straight with summer. I actually ran this through a few times within the past few days. For me, in Rainbows, like I said, just a great summer album, lots of solid cuts throughout the whole thing. I think Weird Fishes / Arpeggi might be my favorite track off of it, but I mean, there's a lot of good tracks off this thing, and it's probably in that top three. Radiohead exclusive, the exclusive top three. Throw in OK Computer and Kid A, and Rainbows is probably a solid 3 for me for the whole Radiohead discography. But a really solid project, and obviously Radiohead at their prime couldn't really miss when it came to putting out a solid project. So I'm gonna I'll talk about Interpol for a bit. I believe this one is called Turn on the Bright Lights. Listened to it actually a decent amount of times, but not the biggest Interpol fan. I'm gonna stick this one in good though. All the way through, it's some really interesting sounds, but nothing too notable for me to talk about. I think Untitled might be my favorite track off the thing. which yeah, I mean, one of my favorite tracks of all time. I gotta say, some Interpol tracks on this thing are really outstanding. Some great cover art as well. But I do kind of want to skip past that one a little bit and talk about In Utero by Nirvana. Now, I assume this will probably be one of two Nirvana albums on here. There is Nevermind actually right down the list. And yeah, In Utero for me, it's a really, really solid project. And I don't know, it's going to be tough for me to rate Nirvana albums because I don't think Bleach is going to be in here. I actually do have Bleach on vinyl. Don't have this one though. But yeah, I mean, lots of solid tracks on this one. Probably going to have to stick this one in excellent, believe it or not. And I don't know, I mean, there's a lot of notable tracks on this thing. When it comes to grunge in general, it's hard to find two better albums or even three better albums than the three that Nirvana put out in Kurt Cobain's lifetime. And you know, for my dad especially, obviously this my generation has definitely missed out on the whole grunge craze. But yeah, you know, yeah, mid '90s, early '90s. This is really the pinnacle of music coming out at that point. Maybe throw in Radiohead at the end of the '90s for sure. Also, all the solid '90s hip hop coming out too. But yeah, I mean, Nirvana, they're just an iconic band. And unfortunately, I was not able to be alive during their peak moments, because I think it would have been incredible, you know, getting excited about a new Nirvana release at the time. So yeah, for me, not too much to note on the actual music in this thing itself. Some of my favorite tracks from Nirvana's fall on this thing, but I actually listen to the live albums a lot more, like Live at Reading, MTV Unplugged. Those are actually my favorite Nirvana albums to listen to, or just releases in general to listen to. So for me, nothing too much to say on the music, but In Apologies might be my favorite Nirvana track or up there. Anyway, so yeah, moving on to Led Zeppelin. I believe this is Led Zeppelin 4. Don't hate me if I missed that one, because not really the biggest Led Zeppelin fan. I mean, I listen to them, you know, every so often. I'm actually more of a fan of the first self-titled Led Zeppelin 1. That's probably the one I listened to the most, but this one does have Stairway to Heaven on it. I do think this one is probably a tad overrated, if I'm being honest. But it's hard to stick this one in just good. I'm going to do it because I don't really listen to it all that often, and it's not really all that notable for me. But I mean, I'm sure a lot of people would stick this one straight in Masterpiece, and I wouldn't blame you for it. But for me, it doesn't really have as much as an effect, or isn't as weighty when it comes to my music listening experience. So it's going to go to good. Not to discount it at all, but I mean, I haven't really listened to it all that much, and I think, you know, if Led Zeppelin 1 was on this thing, I'm not sure if it is on the list, but if it was, that one would probably be going straight into excellent, and a lot of Nirvana's work not Nirvana, Led Zeppelin's work is just incredible stuff, especially considering the times that they were releasing it at, you know, in the 70s and all that. So moving on, we have David Bowie, Low. This one's actually going to go straight to excellent. Glad this one made it on the list. Because this is my favorite David Bowie record, and I'm not really sure how widespread that belief is. Not sure, you know, curious to hear if you guys listen to David Bowie. Let me know what your guys' favorite album of his is out of his discography. But yeah, Low is mine, and I think a lot of it is down to those synthy, you know, more ambient tracks in the second half of this thing. I mean, just absolutely stunning stuff on the second half, and that's probably my favorite, you know, half album of his whole discography is the second half of Low. Just absolutely outstanding stuff for David Bowie, and I think for me, this one definitely was one of the albums that drew me into his you know, presence in the music industry even more. So yeah, that's Low. Moving on, we have Master of Puppets, and I mean, this one's going in interesting at times. I mean, I've listened to this thing a few times, but like I said, listening to Burzum, for example, listening to Jane Doe, it's like, what? I don't really have a reason to listen to Metallica anymore. And not to discount Metallica for any you Metallica fans out there, but yeah, for me, I mean, Burzum, Philosophy by Burzum does a lot more for me, and Jane Doe by Converge does a lot more for me than Master of Puppets ever will, I think, and that's why it's going interesting at times. Like I said, I listened to it a handful of times, but just doesn't really do anything for me. So we next have MF Doom, his Food. This one goes, once again, this is going to be stuck into interesting at times. When it comes to MF Doom records, not really one of my favorites. He's got, of course, he's got, the great production, catchy lyricism and all that, quirky bars, but when it comes to MF Doom records, I mean, there's probably, at least 3 or 4 other ones that I can think of right now, specifically Mad Villainy, which is later down this list, I can see right here, that I prefer to this one, so that's why it's going to go interesting at times. But obviously, when it's compared to the rest of music in general, it's still a really, really quality album. Just isn't one of my favorites of his. I kind of prefer his more darker, lyricism, honestly, on the likes of Victor Vaughn or even King Ghidorah, for example. Those are two of my favorites of his. Moving down the list, we have Modest Mouse. And I'm going to stick this one in, once again, this is going to go interesting at times. Haven't really listened to this one too many times. Can't say I'm the hugest of Modest Mouse fans. And I still listen to it, so I'm still going to count it on the list. But nothing too notable for me out of this one. I think this is actually, I can't even remember what this is called. I think it's In the Lonesome Crowded West, if I'm not mistaken. I feel like I need to now go check on that. In the Lonesome Crowded West. If I got this right, I'm going to be pleased with myself. But anyways, for me, when it comes to this one, like I said, nothing too notable for me. It isn't an album that I consistently go back to. And Modest Mouse doesn't really quite connect with me. And it is that one. Okay, so I was right, but that kind of shows you how little I have listened to Modest Mouse. So not to discount Modest Mouse here, but just really haven't listened to them enough. Maybe something I will get more into in the future. Another band like that for me is sort of Boards of Canada. Probably listen to them a lot more than Modest Mouse, but just doesn't really do anything for me. And I mean, I like IDM. I like a lot of the sounds that they are using, and actually, it's kind of funny seeing it now. A lot of their songs being sampled by, I know, like Suicide Boys has sampled them before. I'm trying to think of any other good examples of that, but a lot of their stuff is being sampled these days. Really showing, the I guess the widespread enjoyment of their work in general. I think even by the hip hop community, but just for me, it just doesn't really do anything. I think of it more as just like a soundtrack more than anything else, more like an album that I'd listen to, while I was in the midst of doing something, maybe going for a walk, for example. Probably another solid walking album. This is Music Has the Rights to Children, if I'm not mistaken as well, so that kind of shows you, once again, how little I listen to Boards of Canada. Maybe I'll get more into them in the future, but sticking them in interesting at times right now because I've listened to them just like Modest Mouse, but haven't really got too far into them. I'm sure a lot of people will probably be, well, I say a lot of people, the few people who are watching this, some of you guys might be a lot more into Boards of Canada than me and be a little bit disappointed in my take on them, but that's kind of my take so far. Moving on, we have New Order. This one's another one going straight to interesting at times. Not really the biggest New Order fan. I think it might come more down to the fact that I'm such a huge fan of Joy Division, which I think there is at least one of the Joy Division albums on here later at some point. Oh, there it is. But yeah, overall for me, New Order just doesn't really hit for me at all. There's a few tracks that I enjoy listening to every so often, but yeah, overall for me, New Order is just not that notable when it comes to my music listening experience, and so that's why it gets stuck in interesting at times. Another Nirvana album here. We have Nevermind, the classic, and it's just so overplayed, but it's also so good. That's the problem. I feel like it's overrated in some respects, but at the same time, it does justify its rating, because I mean, Smells Like Teen Spirit. It's not that I hate the track or anything like that, but it's just so overplayed. But like looking throughout the rest of this thing, just some absolutely outstanding tracks defining the grunge era of rock in the early 90s and mid 90s. It's just very, very incredible. Both these two, Inner Tira and Nevermind, making the excellent list. And I think I sort of, for me, like looking back at where some of these are falling, I actually sort of justify that as well. Like I genuinely believe that those two are probably, for me, preferred to anything in good and anything in interesting at times. So definitely a huge Grudge fan, despite, like I said, not being able to live in the era. Would have loved to do so, but appreciating the music now at least. So not my favorite grunge albums though. Those two. Actually, that one will I think fall later this list, so I'll be able to talk about that a little bit later. But two albums for me that are absolutely essential to listen to for any music fan starting to come around to grunge. Then we have Pet Sounds by Beach Boys. This one's another one going straight to excellent. I mean, and the simple way I describe this is, I mean, these are some of the most beautiful songs on earth with some amazing vocal melodies and harmonies as well, interwoven throughout this thing. Some great, just outstanding instrumentals. And I feel like for me, when I first got into Beach Boys, I sort of just like disregarded them as, I sort of thought of them as like the Beach Boys that, did those Christmas covers and those Christmas songs and all that. But like, you really have to delve into them a little bit to appreciate them, I think, for what they are. Because once again, too, they did have such a huge transformation of their sound after receiving, pop stardom early on in their careers for their like surfing style music. But I like how they didn't change the name. They stuck with the name, and they put out some of the this is probably one of the best pop records of all time. And unfortunately, we didn't get to see Smile or at the finished product of that. Smile is obviously widely considered one of the best unfinished albums of all time. There is like a compilation on Spotify of all the tracks from the sort of, some of them sort of finished, some of them completely finished tracks from those recording sessions. Good Vibrations being one of them, for example. Outstanding band. Brian Wilson being a really, really interesting guy, and it's unfortunate that they were unable to finish that one. Moving on, we have Pink Floyd Animals. This is probably my second favorite Pink Floyd album, and it's going to be stuck in excellent. I do have this one on vinyl as well. I actually do have Pet Sounds on vinyl too. Just a minor side note. Animals for me, like I said, my second favorite Pink Floyd. First being Metal. I'm not sure if Metal is on here. So this might be. I'm sure Dark Side of the Moon will be on here. Maybe not actually, because maybe that's considered, because this is Rate Your Music, so that might be considered too mainstream. I don't know. We'll see. Animals for me, great tracks. Of course, lots of parallels to Animal Farm by George Orwell, which I also really enjoy that book as well. So if you enjoy the book, you will likely enjoy, and you're into prog music, prog rock, then you will very likely enjoy this one. Some great lyrics on this thing. Just some great progressions when it comes to songs. There are obviously a lot of them are. I think it's 5 tracks total, but there's like 3. I think it's 5 total and 3 more extended ones. And I'm definitely a sucker for 10, 15 minute long tracks. So that one gets me. Moving on, we have Pixies. We have Doolittle. This one, I'm going to stick it interesting at times. Once again, Pixies sort of a band where I've listened to extensively, sort of like New Order, for example. I'm trying to think of another example on this list already. Even Metallica I've listened to pretty extensively. I don't really connect with it very much at all. And I don't know. I think there's just things out there. There's other genres out there that just do more for me than the Pixies do. It's sort of like an abrasive, fuzzy sound at times for them. Definitely defining alternative rock for their the era that they were in. But yeah, when it comes to their music overall, like I rarely find myself going back and listening to them. I actually like Bossa Nova. That's probably my favorite album of theirs. But yeah, other than that, I really don't listen to them all that often. I gotta admit, despite going through their entire discography multiple times, there's not a band I really go back to all that often. So definitely know some people that enjoy the Pixies a lot, but for me it doesn't really do as much. Moving down the list, we have Pom Pom by Ariel Pink. This is a more recent one. For me, this one's going in good. I can't really talk too much about it. I've only listened to it a handful of times, but still some really interesting tracks. Ariel Pink's I think just a really talented guy overall. He's been featured in a bunch of stuff too, but Pom Pom, probably one of his best. I'm trying to think. I can't even remember what the other album is that I really like. Kind of showing you how little I've really listened to him overall, but definitely an artist I'll probably listen to a lot more in the coming years, as he does sort of suit a I don't know, like a genre that I listen to a lot of right now. So yeah, Ariel Pink, pretty interesting stuff. A lot of like psychedelic, more infused moments throughout his works, and Pom Pom being one of his more cohesive albums overall. Next we have Portishead, and this is actually my third favorite Portishead album. It is also called 3, I'm pretty sure. I think it's called 3. It is the cover is P3, but yeah, this one falls. I don't want to stick it in interesting at times though. I feel like I'm gonna stick it in good again. Portishead for me, once again, one of those artists like even Nirvana, for example, where just their discography is so consistent. All of their releases are amazing. Also, like Nirvana, for example, they really defined a genre, almost popularized and defined a genre. Nirvana being grunge, of course. Portishead being trip hop. So yeah, some really great records from them overall. Dummy, maybe their best. I don't know, it's tough, but this one, P3, is my third favorite of theirs, but still, obviously, still falling in good, so still a very, very solid album. Definitely recommend Portishead. Maybe even for you hip-hop fans out there who want to get into some more alternative stuff. Trip hop rather, is a really interesting genre overall. I think there's a lot of great records out there. Then we have Automatic for the People by REM. This one's gonna fall interesting at times, and I still stuck it in the list. But it's one of those like sort of Modest Mouse in the Lonesome Crowded West, one that I haven't really listened to all that much, and one that I haven't really connected to with all that much. I'm going to stick it in interesting at times because for me, I've still listened to it, but at the same time, not extensively enough to really have grasped its significance, perhaps, I guess you could say. So I'm going to just quickly move on from REM. Let me know if you're an REM fan in the comments, and perhaps I'll have to go back and listen to them a bit more. Moving on, we have Revolver by the Beatles. For me, it's probably my second favorite Beatles album, and it is going to go up to excellent. Just some of the tracks on this thing are all, essentially all, for the Beatles anyway, all essential tracks on Revolver. Really, really interesting sound for the time that they released this thing. It would have been once again, I'm not really good at attributing years to albums, but it would have been mid to late 60s anyways. Defining pop music going forward for the next 50 to 60 years, pretty much up to present date even. Still aspects that wouldn't have really been possible without the Beatles. So it is probably my second favorite, maybe third favorite Beatles album. I'd probably throw the Beatles self-titled, the White Album, and then also Abbey Road above this one, but it's definitely up there, sort of aligning with In Rainbows maybe being the third favorite project of mine of the given artist. But yeah, overall, really quality album. Definitely recommend a listen if you're into pop music these days. Even maybe you haven't really explored the Beatles, Revolver might be one of the first ones you can go back to and listen. Then we have Pavement's Slanted and Enchanted. This one's a tough one for me. I'm probably going to stick this one in good. It's not my favorite of Pavement's, but Pavement's Stephen Malkmus, really talented vocalist, really unique sound. At the time, sort of an alternative route to grunge at the time. It's sort of out around the same time as the whole grunge movement, more just a straight, you can think of it as just a straight alternative rock, more a take. And obviously, alternative rock sort of is a wide encompassing term, but yeah, definitely a bit more lo-fi, and less about like the heavy riffs, less tied to heavy metal than grunge, for example. But yeah, Pavement definitely worth a listen. Some great lyrics throughout this thing, really unique sound, and my second favorite of theirs probably, if I had to pick. Moving on, we have probably my favorite grunge album, and I say probably, it definitely is, Siamese Dream by Smashing Pumpkins. This one's going to be the second one in the masterpiece tier, and for me, once again, it's the best of a genre, best of this grunge era, in my opinion. Some great tracks on this thing. Mayonnaise even heavily, I'd say, shoegaze influence. You can definitely hear some shoegaze sounds in this thing. Layered vocals, Billy Corgan, love him, I hate him. I don't really know too many people who love Billy Corgan as a person. But once again, I mean, it's kind of sort of a common theme here. Obviously, Billy Corgan hasn't done anything nearly as extreme as Varg from Burzum, but he has, however, said some controversial things throughout the years and all that stuff. His personality is sort of polarizing, but just an absolutely incredible album with an incredible sound coming out at the time. I want this one on vinyl very badly. It is a little hard to get, but I will probably get around to purchasing this one eventually, as it's an absolute essential. I listen to this one all the time. I think it was probably my most listened to album last summer, and as I really got into the Smashing Pumpkins, and it's up there with Melancholy. It's my favorite from them for sure, but Melancholy is another one. Melancholy and the Infinite Sadness, another one of theirs that I heavily enjoy. So I feel like I might have to cut it short. I mean, I think it's been upwards of 45 to 50 minutes. So I'm probably going to cut this one short and maybe do a part 2. There is still a pretty solid selection of albums left on this thing. So maybe if we hit a certain number of likes or something like that, or if you guys are really interested in seeing a part 2, I'll do a part 2. Otherwise, I might just leave it at that because I don't really want to go on for an hour and a half or 2 hours. Because I'm not sure how many people out there want to listen to me ramble on about music for 2 hours. So I'm gonna cut it short here. If you guys enjoyed, leave a like, let me know. This will be an especially important video for likes and comments, I think, because if you guys show that you want to see a part 2, I will make a part 2. If not, then I will probably just leave it at that, honestly. But yeah, so let me know if you guys are interested in a part 2, and I will continue talking about some of my favorite albums. Like I said, still a very interesting selection left on this list. I'm kind of curious to hear if you guys are really interested, of course, some of your thoughts and opinions based on where I put some of these things. Could be some controversial ones. I'm thinking maybe Metallica might be one where there might be some disagreement, maybe even Merriweather Post-Pavilion, for example. But yeah, interested to hear your thoughts and opinions, and like I said, leave a like or comment if you want to see a part 2 where I finish off this list. Otherwise, I will talk to you guys later. Thanks for tuning in.